Thanks, Ryan. As Ryan said, my name is Alan Haley. You know who I am now. Let me just take a second to tell you what I do. I do fonts and I do type. I've been a lettering artist. I've been a typeface designer. I've been a typographic educator. I've built typeface libraries. I've written a few books on type and typography and more articles than I can probably remember. I've spent most of my life and all of my career in the typographic arts. So now you know what I do. Maybe it'll help if I know what you do. Are you all web designers, creative directors, that kind of thing? Is that right? Yes? Can't hear you. All right, okay. So if that's the case, you know fonts. You know that fonts are powerful. You know that fonts command attention, that they establish hierarchy, that they engage us, and that they build brand. You know that fonts command attention. They create powerful headlines, commanding statements about products and services, and incredibly strong calls to action. You know that fonts build hierarchy, especially in large websites where you need to help the visitor go through a large number of pages. Fonts help the reader know what's the most important thing, what's the secondary, and what's the tertiary. You know that fonts engage us. Just looking at a typeface at a particular font tells us something about the message that it's going to be telling you about. This could be the cover of a travel brochure, perhaps. This typeface could be used as a headline for a child's product, and maybe this one for an advertisement for a Western wear store. Fonts engage us. Fonts also build brand. Some of the world's most important brands, you can boo now, are built on fonts. Thing maybe you didn't know or don't know, that as typographic communication evolved, fonts were part and parcel of every one of those technological breakthroughs. Fonts were there when Gutenberg thought up the idea of typographic communication in the middle 1400s. Fonts were part of the technological breakthrough that brought hot metal machine set typesetting in the late 1800s. Fonts were there in the 1920s, in the 1930s when we first flirted with phototype. And you know fonts were there when Apple Computer, Adobe, and a little application called PageMaker, ushered in what we now know is the desktop publishing revolution. Fonts were there at each one of these breakthroughs. But they weren't there on the web, were they? You know this only too well. You know, when the web was first invented, we could download HTML code. Wasn't long after that, we could download image files, and we began to download audio files, and soon we could do streaming video. But fonts weren't there. We had to rely on the client's PC for the fonts that we need to work with. So what's the problem? Web designers don't have the powerful typographic tools that graphic designers have. In fact, I read something yesterday that said web designers don't have the tools of a 7th grader as far as fonts go. So what's the problem? Well, let's take a look at a typical web project. You're in your studio, your office, and a client comes in and says, I'd like you to build me a website. We're a little fashion company, and we publish a newsletter, and here's my stationery, and here's my business card, and here's a little newsletter we put together. We've invested a lot in the fonts for this. We use these fonts to differentiate ourselves from our competition. We use these fonts to build our brand. and we use them to engage the people that read them, that we hand them out to. We'd like you to transfer this to a website you're going to build for us. We get two choices, right? Neither of them are very good. You can use embedded graphics, and we all know the issues with embedded graphics. They're not searchable. They're a horror show to deal with as far as workflow. But you could use them, or you could use system fonts. Neither of these are very good solutions. Now, system fonts, you think about it, there's a half a dozen fonts that you can work with. I read the other day that there are over 2 million websites out there. How are you going to differentiate a website? How are you going to brand somebody's product or services with a half a dozen fonts? The answer is you're not. So you could build a website with system fonts. You could use Verdana, you could use Times New Roman, and faces like that, but you're not going to replicate the brand that the client brought to you, and you're not going to be supporting the fonts that they use. You could use embedded graphics, but again, you know the problem with that. The copy's not searchable. Changes are a horror show. And there are accessibility issues for the impaired. That was yesterday. Today, right now today, Webfont support has reached critical mass. And every one of the 5 major browsers support dynamic downloading of fonts to a client's PC in one form or another. So today, not only can you download HTML files and audio files and video files, you can download fonts. Virtually an unlimited number of fonts. That's the good news. The bad news is there's still kind of a lot of complexity around trying to do this. First, there are font formats. There's EOT, embedded open type. There's WOF, web open font format. There's raw true type. And you've got to sort of sort through all these formats. In fact, I was talking with a young designer yesterday, a young typeface designer, and he said, you know, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make my fonts available for the web because that's where the future is. But he said, you know, by the time I start subsetting for, you know, standard fonts and pro fonts that do multiple languages, and then I support all the different formats, I'm creating 20 fonts for every one typeface that I draw. So the font formats are an issue. And then there's browser compatibility, because not every browser takes advantage of every format. And then there are licensing issues. You see, you probably know this, but fonts are digital intellectual property, which means somebody owns it. Whether it's a largest company like the one I work for, a small boutique foundry, or an individual typeface designer, somebody owns it. And to take advantage of it, you have to license it. And right now today, there are virtually no licenses for font data that allow you to take that data and to put it onto somebody else's PC, basically give it to them, and let them use it as they will. So licensing is an issue. And then there's font optimization. You can't take any font and just toss it up on a screen and think it's going to look good, because it won't. You say, well, yeah, the system fonts look good. Well, the system fonts look good because companies like Microsoft and Apple have spent huge amounts of time, money, and resource to make them look good. Just any font won't work well on a screen. There's more. There's security issues. There's hot linking. Somebody can hook onto that font and steal bandwidth. There's liability issues. If you license that font, you're liable to protect that IP. The other thing is an evolving environment. We've been watching it for some time, and the last 6 months or so, every couple of weeks, one of the browser companies is saying, we're going to support downloadable fonts this way. And somebody else says, no, we're going to do it this way. So it's a continually evolving environment. And then there's language support. Now, most of us in this room are familiar with what we in the type community call the Latin alphabet, based on the Latin alphabet. And that allows you to set words in Western European languages and languages in North America. All well and good, until you think about over 50% of the world speak East Asian languages and Indic. And some of these fonts have over 60,000 glyphs in them. That's a 10 to 20 megabyte download. And you know, even the pipe we've got for digital information today on the web won't accept that. So the good news is that fonts can be downloaded to your PC.